Hi, so I'm going to do two more videos which talk about cases that I've completed myself using problem structuring methods. So one is quite a straightforward private sector project, and the second one is a public sector project which is more unusual. This video will talk about the first case. So let's just remind ourselves about problem structuring practice. So generally we're looking at situations which are going to involve unstructured problems, complex situations and strategic thinking normally. But of course PSMs are very flexible. So I mean that's one of their strengths, but it's also one of their weaknesses in terms of communicating them to new users. Normally, we're going to be working with a group of participants who are involved in the situation, because PSMs, all of them, sign up to the idea that it's better to be participative when you're solving problems and doing strategy, because it assists implementation, but it also helps us to really get to the heart of the matter. Now, facilitation is often assumed, and certainly that there was a degree of facilitation within this project, although I think I would go as far to say that this is an SSM oriented project, and I think it's fair to say that the SSM people are less facilitation oriented than some of the other PSMs like strategic choice and SODA. And really the value of PSMs is around providing conceptual tools to express and capture views and support the thinking in that way. So a couple of nice quotes there. Unstructured problems were seen to involve multiple stakeholders, multiple perspectives, conflicting interests, various types of uncertainties, and significant intangibles. Okay, so the extent to which all of that is true will differ between situations. I think this particular case I'm going to talk about in this video is not that complex, and there's not a huge difference in viewpoints, although there are differing viewpoints. PSMs offer a way of representing the situation that will enable participants to clarify their predicaments, converge on a potentially actionable mutual problem or issue within it, and agree on commitments that will at least partially resolve it. And that's exactly what happens in this case. Okay, so through the workshops, we are able to express the situation, clarify the nature of the problem and agree to that, and then come up with ideas to improve that situation. So if we think about the project scenarios that might be possible for PSM use, this particular case is a classic PSM. So practitioner, which was me, facilitates a group of people within a workshop environment. So in this case there was 3 workshops to basically come up with solutions to a perceived problem. So we followed a typical format for a project that I would tend to use. So we had 3 workshops. Each of the workshops had about 3 or 4 people in them, and they were all stakeholders from within the business. There was no external stakeholders involved in this project. In the workshop 1, we tried to express the situation using rich pictures. Workshop 2, we did some modelling to help think through a particular issue, and then in the final workshop we reviewed what we'd done, and we came up with commitments to take the situation forwards. And as we went through the project, I think the project took about 2 weeks to actually complete, And after each workshop, I wrote a short report, just 2 or 3 pages only, which just documented what happened. And it also gives me an opportunity to sit and think about, what happened, and also to finish off the SSM products. So the rich pictures and the modelling, I would tend to finish off um, when I was writing up the report. So here's the rich picture. This is actually not the original one, which was actually done in the workshop, because that was actually quite messy. In this particular project, I've changed the name of the company so that it's anonymous. So I had to redo some of the outputs to enable me to publish this, because it was published in a chapter of an MBA module. So in the actual workshop, what happened was I led the rich picturing. So I stood in front of a large whiteboard and drew and started to draw a picture, and the participants in the workshop sort of contributed to that and joined into that picturing process until we felt we had a pretty reasonable summary of the situation. So just very quickly, Turf Science Limited, it's a business which sells fertilizer to golf courses, and fantastic little business. Basically, the fertilizer contract for a golf course is worth up to £10,000 a year for a large, well-known golf course like the Belfry, for example, which was one of their clients. And basically, their clients were referred to as turf managers, and basically they were the people in charge of the greens and the fairways in the golf club. Now, it was a very interesting business. I mean, all businesses are unique, all organisations are unique, and Turf Science was no different. Very, very interesting business. The owner of the business was a guy who'd worked for one of the larger companies and then had left and set up his own business. So it was quite a small business in terms of employees, and he'd taken most of his clients with him when he left the company that he was working for. And basically, what happens is every year the turf manager would sign a contract for fertilizer for the year, and turf managers tended to stay loyal to the supplier of fertilizer, mainly because they were risk averse and they were spending somebody else's money. Golf courses tended to be not price sensitive, so the main driver here was security, really. So the turf managers would tend to stick with the company that they'd used traditionally, because they didn't want to sort of change things and make a mess of the greens. So as long as the greens were in good shape and doing really well, then their job would be secure. So that's great in one sense, because it means that the clients tend to stay with the business for long periods of time. But it means it's difficult to grow your business, because your potential customers are actually difficult to actually attract away from other companies. So an important part of the business was this process of trying to bring turf managers from other companies to your company. And that involved essentially breaking the relationship that they had with another salesperson. Now, the explicit reason given for the project was that the company were not being successful in hiring salespeople. So what they were basically finding is that they were hiring salespeople, but the salespeople were not able to do the job. So essentially, the way that they worked is that they would they had split the UK and parts of Europe up into geographical areas, and a new salesperson would be given a geographical area, and it's a classic rep type of sales. So they would travel around that geographical area, meeting up with turf managers from all the golf clubs that they were trying to target, and essentially try and persuade those turf managers to use Turf Science Limited. Now, essentially, Turf Science was doing a similar sort of job to other companies selling fertilizer. They were more scientific, and they did more scientific testing of the soil and the type of grass. So they did have a competitive advantage in that, but essentially they were doing a fairly similar job. And it was fantastic business in the sense that if you think an average annual account would be worth somewhere between £5,000 and £10,000, but the actual cost of the fertilizer to Turf Science would be more like £1,000. So it was a high markup business, very profitable, but very difficult to grow. So the key issue when we started off the project was Turf Science are unable to hire sales staff who could cover their costs. So they were unable to sell enough fertilizer to actually cover the cost of their salary, and hence the business just couldn't grow. So that was the problem. So we looked at the situation, we looked at the issues, we tried to understand what was happening. It was clearly, a sales system problem. There was nothing wrong with the product. There was nothing wrong with essentially the service they were providing. They were just struggling to grow their number of customers. So the next step of SSM is to ask, can we use the purposeful activity system concept here in this project to help us think about things? Well, of course, we were thinking about the sales system, and there clearly was a problem with the sales system. The customer was actually very focused on this idea of hiring sales staff, but I said, let's just step back and let's, this is a sales system. That's the relevant system that your particular problem is located in. Let's just have a look at the sales system first. Let's just take a step back and let's see if we can understand what's going on. So we start by choosing a referent. So in this case, it would be the sales system. So that's a department or a process, if you like. And let's think of it as a purposeful activity system. And let's initially, let's start with a baseline model, and let's just see if we can understand what it's doing, and let's see if we can identify where the problem might be. Okay, so to use the purposeful activity system language, we need to articulate our purposeful activity system. So if you remember, we do a definition, we do an activity model, and we might do a CATWO as well, just to help us think it through. Now, the root definition is in the Word document that I'm going to provide you with this video. So let's just have a look at the activity model. So here's the basic baseline systems model of the sales system, and I'll just take you through it. So if we start top left and just work our way down to the bottom right. So the first activity is appreciate characteristics of turf managers. So of course, this sales system is oriented towards dealing with turf managers. So we need to understand these people. We need to understand their role. We need to understand what their problems are, what their anxieties are. And as I said before, their major anxiety was that there would be a problem with the greens or the fairways. That, if the members of the golf club would always be happy as long as the greens were in good condition and the fairways were in good condition. So as long as the greens and the fairways were in good condition, then the members of the golf club would be happy and the turf manager's job would be secure. And these are reasonably well paid individuals, and it's a highly skilled job. So they were mainly concerned about keeping the greens in good condition. So they were naturally risk averse, and they were not price sensitive, and they would tend to stick with what was working. So once you've got them, they were great customers, but getting them was hard because you had to wrestle them off somebody else. Next activity: design program of events and communications for turf managers, and deliver those events to secure new accounts and maintain relationships. Okay, so this is a classic rep-oriented sales process. So it's a classic business-to-business type of selling. Many business-to-business sales operations use reps who usually geographical reps who travel around creating relationships. And very much part of that is to try and organize events and take clients to events or things like the British Formula One Grand Prix or football matches to sort of make the client feel like that relationship is strong, and also as a way of trying to wrestle customers from other businesses. If you can offer really, really great events and trips and useful seminars, then that's one way of trying to bring people across to your company. And the managing director of this business was extremely good at that sort of thing. He was a very convincing, charismatic individual. He certainly had no problem doing the job of the salesperson. If he had more time, that he could have grown the business quite easily using his own sales abilities. But obviously, there was a limit to how many things he could do. So, so that was a very important side of the sales system. And then if we go sort of top middle, we've got develop sales skills, technical knowledge, and morale of sales staff. So that's all about trying to develop. If you've hired salespeople, and these people tended to be sort of from varying sort of backgrounds. There's no degree in sales really. Well, there isn't, and you can't. There's no course in how to be a seller of fertilizer to golf courses. So the people who tended to do this type of work would be. One of the salespeople was an ex-professional golfer. So he'd actually been a professional. And he'd moved across to work for Turf Science. One of them was an ex-greenkeeper, so he worked as a greenkeeper, and he decided to come across and work for Turf Science. So obviously, once they were hired, then there was a process of trying to develop their skills in terms of sales, but also their knowledge of how Turf Science operated, and also trying to build them up because. Traveling around, repping, it's psychologically it's quite challenging because you're constantly trying to deal with potential failure of developing your client list. Then we've got maintain database of customers and potential customers. So obviously, an important part of this business is knowing where all the golf courses are. And knowing who all the turf managers are, and having all their contact details. And then conduct site visits to turf managers, so meetings, problem solving, supporting, information gathering, etc. So essentially the main part of these salespeople's job was essentially travelling around all the golf courses, trying to build relationships with turf managers or maintaining relationships with turf managers if they were already a customer. So that was the core activity of their role. And then we've got entertain turf managers socially, so meals, drinks, football, etc. So apart from the events, which were sort of bigger activities and tended to involve multiple people, there would also be a significant amount of socialising with turf managers. So the sales staff would often play golf with the turf managers. They would have lunch with them. They would take them out for drinks. So very much part of the job was to encourage a strong professional and a friendship relationship with these turf managers. And then all of that feeds into the final activity, which is sign new accounts and complete repeat orders. Okay, so that's doing the business. So that's the key target for all of this is, signing the annual contract to renew the fertilizer for the next year, or getting that new account. And obviously, if they did get a new account, that would be a really great result for the sales staff. Now, so that was our baseline model, and we spent a workshop just building that up and looking at it. Now, you'll notice that I've color-coded it, because the thing that really came out of that for me, and I think it certainly occurred to me, especially when I wrote up this model, was that the managing director was essentially running this sales system design, and what he was forgetting was that he was assuming that the sales staff were like him, that they were able to do what he could do, and so a lot of the language that he would give was, I can't understand why the sales staff can't do it. Why can't they do it? They're just not working hard enough, or do we need to train them up more? Or I just can't find the right people to fit into this sales staff. Okay, but he what occurred to me and hadn't occurred to him is that he hadn't thought that there might be something wrong with the sales system. Okay, so it became quite clear to me that there was something wrong with the sales system, that it wasn't actually the fault of the sales staff, it was the fault of the sales system. So I color-coded these because it became quite clear that the central team, and that really mostly means the actual managing director, needed to take much more responsibility for those activities in red. So instead of just saying, I'm sorry, but it's your problem, sales staff, he needed to say, no, actually, it's not their problem, because actually they can't do that. I need to take more responsibility. The system needs to take more responsibility. So what we did is, in the writing up of that modelling session, I started to reflect on that, and it started to become clear to me that the sales system needed to be redesigned, and I started to sort of indicate that in the reflection and documentation that was coming out. And that led us into the final workshop, where we actually could sit down and look at the situation. So in the final workshop, we looked at the rich picture, we looked at the issues, we looked at the model, and we started to ask ourselves, whether the sales system needed to be innovated. So obviously I didn't want to come back and sort of say, this is what you need to do, because then I would have been operating in a very expert mode. But at the same time, I did have a very clear view on what should happen. But obviously we discussed it, and I think the sales staff and the managing director started to see where it was going. So it was quite clear that there was learning had happened around the sales system, and I think we all felt that the sales system was something that we could think about and make changes to. It became clear that there were assumptions about what sales staff could do which were not actually practically viable. And I think he started to realise that the sales staff were not on the same level as him. They didn't have his experience, they didn't have his knowledge, they didn't have his charisma, and they just didn't have his confidence, and so they just couldn't do what he was asking them to do. And because it was impossible to actually go out and hire people like the managing director, it became clear that something else needed to happen. So that the recognition started to emerge that the central team needed to take more responsibility over some of the activities in the sales system. So there was recognition also that the central team needed to communicate more effectively with the sales staff. So just by doing the workshops that we did and the way that I ran them and the way that we invited people to talk and we facilitated, the managing director recognised that wasn't how he normally ran meetings, and that his meetings were actually often just him talking. So there was learning about that as well. So what we spent time thinking about how to redesign the sales system, and we recognised that we needed to make use of and leverage the managing director. So try and use him in the events where we could leverage him across lots and lots of people. So instead of expecting sales staff to go out and convert potential customers, we actually created more events where the managing director could convert people, because once they were converted, they tended to be relatively straightforward for the sales staff to deal with. Okay, so that's a description of that project. It's a fairly straightforward project in many respects. We probably could have done that project without SSM, but it worked very nicely. The rich picture enabled me and everybody to get on the same page regarding what the situation was and what the issues were, and that was relatively straightforward. The modelling enabled us to look at the sales system in a very structured way and in a very clear way, and it enabled us to think about the sales system rather than thinking about just the salespeople and hiring salespeople. And I think it made the managing director realise that everybody wasn't like him, that he was a unique resource in the business, and that we couldn't go out and hire people like him. And so therefore he needed to create a system where normal salespeople could actually function effectively. So it was a relatively straightforward project, 3 workshops over about 2 weeks, but I think it's a classic example of how an SSM project can work quite nicely. Okay, thanks a lot.